Thank you, Markin. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to thank Biomin for having me here again. It's always a pleasure being at the Asia Nutrition Forum because I get to meet so many of you and I get to learn so much. Well, the only problem with being the last speaker for the evening is that you've got to keep an eye on the watch because everyone's waiting for the rest of the evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I'll try and get on with this, and I'll try and get you in time for the rest of the evening. A couple of months ago, when Justin called me up and he asked me whether I was available to speak, I asked him, I said, yeah, what would you like me to speak about? And he said, I think in India is very famous for astrologers, guys who read the planets and the future. You see, he's famous for astrology. So he said, can you do a little peep into the future and tell us what's this protein economy going to look like? Well, normally I don't take him seriously, but this time I did. And, I know he always pulls my leg about things, but I said, all right, let me see. So before I began, I sat down to think about what protein is going to look like in the future. And I said, let's take a look at the past before we begin. 6 million years ago, this species was living off roots and berries as a gatherer. So there was no protein in the diet. And these guys, well, they either got fed up of eating the same stuff every day, or like one guy said to the other, hey, listen, man, we've got clean air, we've got clean water, and we are vegans, right? We got organic food. But how come neither of us is going to live past 30? There must be some secret to it. Well, so they went out and they discovered fire, they invented weapons, and from gatherers, they became hunter-gatherers. And I think the protein economy began. Of course, at that time, they chased their protein. They didn't have experts like we had all day telling them how to grow protein. So they obviously went out and started chasing those proteins. And you might wonder whether this is just a sensational opening or there's some sense to what's happening in this entire presentation. If some of you have come across a book by Alvin Toffler, who talks about the third wave, he mentions how human civilization and the human evolution has taken place in waves. It took 4 million years to move from a gatherer to hunter, and then it took another few million years for us to all realize that it was easier to grow our protein than chase it down, than hunt it down. And so we came up with this entire business of livestock and meat and poultry and farming. And we all know that till 70 years ago, or maybe 60 years ago, it was still backyard poultry and it was still farmyard dairy. And today, in the last 70 years, I think we've grown, we have evolved leaps and bounds. The same evolution that took us millions of years has now been crunched into probably 6 or 7 decades. So as I look forward, I'm beginning to wonder the rate at which we are evolving, whether it'll be a couple of decades more when there's another wave and things will change. But to begin with, remember, nobody changes until they're forced to change. And nobody wants to fix it until it's broken, right? So until you have a problem, well, you don't fix it. In fact, as a marketing man, I believe all the products we have in use today are nothing but solutions to a problem. Because we had a problem, because it was big, we found a solution. We called it a product, we gave it a name, we called it a brand, and then we sold it to make a profit. When I was young, I remember how we struggled with the things we had. In fact, the other day, my son said to me, he said, Dad, you guys are such a boring generation. I mean, you actually sat in a library and read a book? What a gross waste of time. You spend 2 hours a day reading the newspaper? What a waste of time. Such a boring generation, no WhatsApp, no internet, nothing. Well, I felt miserable about it. I normally do, especially when my wife's listening in the next room. And I said, yeah, we wasted our lives trying to make life exciting for you. So we built all these things for you. Now let me see what you're going to do for the next generation. All right? Our generation worked hard to give you all this technology so that you guys might enjoy yourself. Now, get your you-know-what out of here and invent something new and tell me. And I think that's the challenge every generation faces, to invent something new. Well, today if you look at meat and the demand for meat, I come from a country which was never known to eat meat in large measure. Indians were basically vegetarian by diets. In fact, you'd be surprised. I'm sure most of you aren't even aware that, we have around 28 states in India, and about 24, I think, or 25 of them have banned the sale and consumption of beef. So you have almost 1/6 of the world that legally, officially, doesn't eat beef or cannot eat beef. So that's why I feel very happy when Justin invites me to these conferences. That's the only time I get to eat something that's illegal. All right. So it's strange, and yet the demand for meat is growing and growing and growing. For example, you look at this beef, which in the year 2005 was 64 million metric tons, is going to grow to 106. Mutton again, pork again, poultry, and eggs. And this is all very exciting news for the industry, isn't it? Yes? Yes. Okay, 3 people said yes, Justin. Okay, good job. I hope they infected the others, and they're all going to say yes at the next question. But no glares to give away. Okay. I think I'll ask Mark for his sharpeners. So if you look at what's happening around the world, we're growing at a very rapid pace, and the demand for meat is growing rapidly. And it's not just the demand for meat. If you look at where this demand's coming from, by 2050, we expect to add on another 2.38 billion people to this population. And you'd be surprised, 51% of that growth is going to come from just these few countries. That's India, Nigeria, Pakistan, and just 9 countries are going to account for more than 51% of the growth. And what that actually means is that we're going to have to feed these hungry millions, and they're not going to be happy eating mere grain or vegetables. Because they're not just a population, they're also a growing middle-class population. And this is the key to the whole business. This middle-class population in 2016 was 3.2, and we're going to add on 160 million each year for the next 5 years, which means that at the end of, that means we're going to be, this middle class is growing exponentially. So what's great about the middle class? And why are we so fascinated with just this middle class? Well, a simple thing, and I like to demystify statistics and figures. If you just analyze what you've been eating since last night, right through the breakfast and lunch, and what you'll probably be having for dinner, you find that the menu has all the various types of protein you can possibly find, and very little, if any, of the carbs and fats out on display. And this is not just a phenomenon you see here, this is a phenomenon you see across the world. Wherever you have a large middle class, you have this demand for meat. Now, all this is fine, and we should be happy, right? Right? Right. But everything's not hunky-dory, and we're going to have a couple of problems because producing this meat is not very cheap. All right, there's just one more statistic. 88% of the next billion entrants to the middle class will be in Asia. I just put this up because I realized many of you would be from these countries, and you might like to see how by 2030, Asia is going to represent 2/3 of the global middle class population. There'll be 350 million in China, 380 in India, 210 in the rest of Asia, and 130 million in the rest of the world. So you're going to have Asia being the hub of protein consumption. And Asia going to consume for two reasons. One, they have a very high propensity to consume. And two, they shall have the ability or the affordability to buy and consume meat. Europe is already consuming, and America is consuming probably close to as much as they can possibly consume. And the populations aren't growing so fast. So we can't really expect huge growth rates, but here we've got a huge middle class waiting to consume. So what does this mean? This means if we translate this into money, the middle class will spend 29 trillion more per year by 2030 on food. So we're looking at a huge middle class there. That's the global economy, middle class spending now. And in 2030, it's going to go up by almost, more or less, double. So that's 1/3 of the global economy. Now, all this looks good, provided we don't have any hiccups or we don't have any problems coming our way, provided everything's going to move the way it's going to move. But as history has taught us, everything doesn't necessarily move the way it's expected to move. And that's why, A, all of us are employed, and B, we all have our jobs. Because every day is a new day, and every day is a new problem, and every day is a new challenge. So with this little background, let's look at what's going to happen in the decades and the years to come. Right. The hunger for meat. And how does it look over the past decades? There we go. We have, that's China, which has grown from 10 kilos per capita per annum to what? 58. Is that it? Yeah. 58 there. So you look at the growth. You look at the other, look at the UK. Well, it's more or less where it is. You look at the USA, all right. The world, yes. But the only driver has been China in this chart. But India is not looking very bright because he is stuck at just 4. So if you wonder why, and I come from India and I've done this report which I've presented to the government of India on this entire business, most of this, 3.7 kilos of this, oh, I'm so sorry, I go back, all right. 3.7 kilos of this 4 kilograms comes from poultry, chicken. Because beef is a big no-no. Pork is an even bigger no-no. Hardly anyone eats pork. And it's only fish, which is too expensive for people to consume. And it's chicken. So chicken has been growing. And it's amazing what statistics can do and how you can play with these numbers and how you can interpret these numbers or just ignore them. Looking at this number, anyone would ignore this market, right? Right? They've gone back to sleep. All right. Well, let me tell you, this market, which is the tiniest square at the bottom of the statistic, is the world's 4th largest market for broiler meat. And the 3rd largest market in the world for eggs. Why? Because 1/6 of the world lives here. All right. So, numbers. Well, you can interpret statistics and numbers the way you want. In fact, this reminds me of one of my marketing stories. All over the world today, footwear and shoes, the biggest brands, Adidas and Reebok and all these numbers, but all these big brands. But in India, do you know which is the largest brand that still sells? There's a brand called Bata. Because somewhere in the 1930s, a Polish gentleman by the name of Thomas Bata came to India, and he thought he'd set up a shoe factory. So he appointed a market research company to do the research, and they came back to him and said, don't waste your time, because nobody wears shoes in India. They're all barefoot. So he went back disappointed, and then one of his salesmen came here. And that guy looked around, and he went back and he wrote a report to his boss. He said, dear Mr. Bata, we must open a factory immediately in India. He said, why? He said, because nobody has shoes to wear. Well, they opened that factory, and till today, it's 2017, they're still the number one in India. So, sometimes looking at these markets, looking at these numbers, you might think it's something we can ignore, but if you look at it closely, it's probably an opportunity that's waiting to be tapped. Having said that, and this is just a bit of information I thought I'd share with you, we look at what's going to be the impact if we do satisfy this entire need for protein and meat. You see, I think someone mentioned it in the morning, I can't remember which of the speakers, that protein production has an impact on vital resources that we have on this planet. And out of all these resources, the three major resources which are impacted are land, water, and the greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide, methane, and the other gases. Now, today we have reached a stage in our evolution where food, clothing, shelter is not as important as survival. We've reached a stage where we're wondering, if we continue the way we're going, whether we'd be able to survive as a species in the future. I came across this yarn the other day. So one planet talking to the other. He says, hi, how are you? And he says, bad. He says, I'm not feeling well at all. He says, why? He says, I got Homo sapiens. He said, don't worry, they won't last long. I had the same problem too long ago. So, you see, we're wondering whether, as a species, we're going to have problems because of this impact on our resources. And there is a school of thought that's growing, in the West especially, that we must keep one eye on our resources when we look at production, and especially food production. Why? Again, that's interesting. Let's look at land use. The major resource is for food. We've got here the cropland used for human consumption that is the vegetables and the food we grow is 22%. The cropland used for animal feed is 10%. And the pastures for grazing is 69%. So we've got a huge, almost 80% just to grow livestock. And this is a major use that we're looking at. And the problem is, in countries that have plenty of land, there is no problem. But there are very few countries with plenty of land. So wherever there's a push for land, what they do is they just cut down the forests and they grow. Like we know some countries in Asia who've just cut down the tropical forests to grow cash crops, like palm oil and others. Like in India. I mean, in India, there's ruthless deforestation only for pastures, because they're all grazed cattle. They're not in farms. They're not stall-fed. They're grazed, so they go out and they graze. And I think now that's a new trend of having grazed cattle, or what do they call that? What fed cattle? Grass-fed cattle. All right. So that's the new style there, and that's the pattern here. So global land use is something that we're worried about, and we see that 1/3 of the arable land for livestock feed goes for livestock feed. 40% of the world's cereal production is used as livestock feed, and 26% of the Earth's ice-free terrestrial surface is used for livestock. So what does this mean? This means people are worried. We look at the water use, the water supply and demand. We're going to run out of water shortly. We all know that. The planet is going to face a 40% shortfall in water supply in 2030, and the demand for water is going to skyrocket to 55%. So with that situation, let's see how we use our water. To grow plants, to make a kilogram of plants or vegetables, we need about 322 liters of water. To grow chicken, a kilogram of chicken, we need about 4,325 liters of water. To grow a kilogram of pork, you need about 5,988 liters of water. For a kilogram of mutton, you need about 8,763 liters of water. And beef, you need 15,414 liters of water to grow 1 kilogram of beef. Which means that now the next resource, which is very, very much in short supply, is being threatened. So we move on to the third, what we talk about, the greenhouse gas emissions, and this is how it fares. This was a nice graphic I found, and I thought it was very useful. Poultry and others, we're talking of other poultry, is 72 on a scale, million tons of CO2 equivalent. Small ruminants, 474, chickens, 612, buffalo, 618, pigs, 668, dairy cattle, 2128, and beef cattle, 2495. So when we look at all this, there is a great pressure on the resources that the world has. And I was surprised to know, is this the slide? No, the other one. I was surprised to know that livestock emits more greenhouse gas than all the cars and the transport industry in the world. Ouch! Now that one hurts. Now that one hurts because there is this whole tribe of people now out there who are vegan and who believe that those of us who aren't vegan are really, really grabbing a lot of the resources of the world, and that we could save that by not eating beef. So, well, in India, they haven't banned beef for those reasons. They banned beef because it's a religious issue. The Hindus, long ago, about 5,000 years ago, some spiritual leader took a categorical decision that the cow was a holy animal. And it had nothing to do with greenhouse gases, believe you me. Because 5,000 years ago, they didn't know about this. But the reason they did this, and I suspect, was purely economical. The cow was the backbone of the agrarian economy 5,000 years ago. And it was the only supply for protein for that population. So they were vegetarian, they relied on dairy products for protein, they had grain and oil from fats from other sources, and the economy was very stable. In fact, right up to the 1600s, the Indian economy was, the GDP was about 27% of the world GDP. And it was probably the richest economy in the world without eating beef. But that was a different reason. And here we go. It is all together, so maybe, if you like to take a closer look at this slide some other time, I'm not going to go through it in detail because I've got one eye on my clock. It's wheat, rice, maize, pulses, roots, and then you see fish, eggs, poultry, dairy, and there you go, that's beef. So one of the biggest areas to be hit, if you like to call it, if the world goes in for looking for alternatives, would be beef. So, that brings me to my crystal ball, and that brings me to my role of a crystal ball gazer this evening. What are the alternatives that people are looking for? And how would they get their protein? Let's say, well, the studies I read talked about a time frame like 10 or 20 years. They said 2030, 2050, but I don't think it will be that soon. I think it will be a little later. But let's see what the alternatives people are looking at as they go around searching for easier ways to grow protein. When I saw this the first time, I said, no, this couldn't be true. Entomophagy. Phagy, as we heard from one of the speakers this morning, is about eating, and entomo is supposed to be about insects. You think we're going to grow insects and eat them? Yes? You think so, doctor? No one thinks so here. They're saying, ouch, we don't believe this to be true. I was surprised to find this. There are more than 1,000 species of edible bugs. And this is something I learned for the first time through this study, that 80% of the countries of the world eat insects in some form or the other. And 2 billion human beings eat insects regularly. Can you believe that? Anyone here feasts on insects? Yeah. Tastes good? Tastes good? Justin? Okay, so that's the menu for this evening. You're going to have nobody there at the party, Justin. All right, so let's see. How does this work? If you look at the efficiency, this is the percentage of the animal that can be eaten. We've got crickets. You can eat about 80% of the animal. Poultry, just 55%. Pigs, 55%. And cattle, just 40%. So efficiency-wise, they're going to be more efficient because you can eat more of it than you can of any other animal. So that's one good thing. And look, let's talk about FCRs, because this is something that will excite all you veterinarians here and nutritionists especially. FCRs. 10 kilos of feed would create 9 kilos of insect. Anyone wants to do a quick math on that FCR? And 10 kilos of feed produces 1 kilo of beef. All right? The protein, 72% of that grasshopper is protein. 16% is fat and 12% is carb. Whereas the beef, 52% is protein and 48% is fat. Anyone wants to change his mind on tonight's menu? All right. Okay, so we've got efficient protein coming out of insects, and believe you me, it's very easy to produce. They tell me if you have a swarm of locusts, they'll devour a standing field of wheat in a matter of hours. And all you need to do is have a huge barn and just inject a swarm of locusts into that. You can harvest that in no time. Oh, is that easy? No sanitation, no hygiene, no cleaning the barn for 3 weeks, nothing. You're going to be a very rich locust farmer. And what about land use? How does this compare on land use? There you have. You need about 200 square meters of land to produce 1 kilo of beef, 50 square meters of land to produce a kilo of pork, 45 square meters of land to produce a kilo of chicken, and you need 15 square meters to produce a kilo of adult crickets. So you see, on the land use, we're good. And on the water use, well, we are even better. Here we go. 100 gallons of water will produce 6 grams of beef, 13 grams of corn, 19 grams, 63 grams of soya, and 71 grams of cricket, which means that's probably the more efficient than even producing soya and then feeding it to the animals. So you see, we've got bugs, and those of you who eat bugs, you're doing a great service to the environment and to the world. Sustainability, here it is, again, numbers. I'm going to skip through these slides, which I don't want to read because we don't want to keep you away. Vegan, imitation meat. This is something that's, well, started off, I remember I had sampled some of those soy burgers with texture, and they call TVP, texturized vegetable protein and all that, and vegan. And this reminds me, the other day I read a story about this vegan couple who were about 90 years old. You see, they died in a car accident, and they went to heaven. And there, St. Peter was there to welcome them at the gates, and he said, "Come right in." He said, "Here are the barrels of Taiwan beer, all yours, have as much as you want." The Taiwan beer, up in heaven, Justin. And that's the cabinet with the scotch. There's best single malts in the world, and the wines from the finest countries and all the best wines. And that's the dinner table. There are pork ribs, and there's sushi, and there's beef roast, and there's all that you want. And the lady turned to St. Peter and said, "But St. Peter, we are vegan. We don't drink alcohol. We don't eat meat. We don't even have dairy products. And her husband turned to her and said, shut up. If it wasn't for your veganism and your teetotaling, we would have been here 10 years earlier. So, veganism is catching on, and people are catching on with this, what they call imitation meat. We all know about it, combo of wheat and soy protein, plant-based meat alternatives are vegan. Okay, good. All good. So here are some of the brands that are doing well. Beyond Burger, Guardian, Meatless, and the others. All right. So that is one. Microalgae and fungi. Interesting, because I just had fungi last night, and I had fungi again this morning, and I had fungi again for lunch. Of course I did, and I'll probably have fungi again for dinner. We have been eating fungi since God knows when, yeah? Mushrooms? All right. So those little fellows, spirulina, the cousins, the chlorella, and all of them, I was amazed the way you can produce this stuff. Okay, I'm so sorry. The way you can produce this stuff. 50 kilos of yeast biomass in 24 hours can give you 250 tons of protein. Can you believe that? That's how they reproduce, and that's how it grows. And I think this is, well, protein in a form. In fact, I was told spirulina has been used as a food source for the astronauts who traveled in space. If you Google that in, you'll find they packed for them spirulina, because that was the only thing that was protein dense, and it was lightweight and easy to carry. You can Google that in and find out. Single cell protein or mycoprotein, you know all about this. The mushrooms, well, all this stuff is great stuff, and all this stuff is happening. Here are some products that are already out in the market, and they're doing okay. But out of all these alternatives, I found some alternatives quite interesting and really fired up my imagination. I kind of like this idea of seaweed because, you know, it's vegetarian, it's vegan, and it's protein. And the point is, we have 2/3 of this planet as ocean, as sea. And we really don't know what to do with it. In fact, some countries in the Gulf, where I visit often, they're desalinating the water to use for drinking and potable water like you do in the UAE and other countries, but it's very, very expensive. In fact, even India has just set up a desalination plant, and they find it frightfully expensive, and it's just not as good as fresh water. But imagine if you can grow protein using the oceans, what would happen? And the fact is, we're already eating a lot of this stuff, because I think there's something called nori, which is dried into sheets and used to make sushi. There are other varieties. I can't pronounce all these so well. Dulse, arame, wakame, kelp. And all this stuff is so edible and good. But the beauty of it all is the land use. A, you don't need any land because it's grown in the ocean. B, you don't need any fresh water because it's grown in the sea. And 3, instead of releasing greenhouse gases, you're actually carbon negative. You're actually absorbing all the gases, the carbon dioxide and other gases that your cars and the others are spewing into the environment. And the funny part about this whole thing, or the best part about this whole thing, is you need an area the size of Cambodia to grow enough of seaweed to take care of the world's protein needs. Now, that's something big, because imagine there's a huge resource out there which was never looked at and which we've already used and we have endorsed. And this is a professor at the university who's done this study. That's the area he says you need. So I think this is something very exciting. Of course, you'd say it's a cultural thing. Well, people in the Western world don't eat seaweed, and people only in Asia eat seaweed and stuff. Yes, but then, you know, the largest brand of noodles in the world is not from China. It's from India. It's called Maggi noodles. So, if India can learn to eat noodles, I'm sure you can teach the world how to eat seaweed and get their protein. Well, the most, well, another interesting thing I found so far is lab meat. It's different from vegan meat. Vegan meat is from plant sources. Lab meat is meat actually grown in a laboratory with no animal. So you don't need to kill any animals. You don't need to do anything. You don't need farms. All you need to do is take a petri dish, put the nutrients in it, add in your stem cells, put it to something that resembles a refrigerator that has a controlled temperature and humidity and other conditions. Pull out the tray after 8 weeks, and you got a beef patty ready to be cooked. Well, I found this.
Right.
Yeah,
How
can
would
you
you
have the
like
film?
not killing it?
Yeah.
Congratulations, now you can.
A biotechnology company called Supermeat has just developed a way to sell meat without actually having to slaughter animals. Check it out.
Eating meat without killing animals. Boom. Write this name down. Supermeat. What do? Real meat, not harming animals. No, it's not fake meat, Tampa meat, almost meat, or all those other non-meats. It's real meat that tastes and feels like meat because it is real meat without harming animals.
That's right. This is not a meat alternative. This is real meat, actual animal tissue. So why am I promoting this on my channel?
First of all, because Supermeat will help keep our round world clean and safe to live in. How? Well, for the same amount of meat, cultured meat uses 99% less land, emits up to 96% less greenhouse gases, and uses up to 96% less water than the meat industry today. Second, Supermeat will help solve world hunger. See, because of the world's limited resources, it will soon be impossible to feed its fast increasing population. With Supermeat, very little resources are needed. Thirdly, Supermeat will be healthier than conventional meat because we can actually supervise the production. And fourth, and not the least important, the price tag. Supermeat is going to be cheaper than conventional meat. Why? Because culturing meat and then mass producing it is just cheaper than growing and feeding billions of animals.
That's right. So Supermeat is able to offer a solution to people who want to eat meat while being able to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, reduce resources used, even make it cheaper. And it's also non-GMO and arguably healthier as it's easier to control it and monitor it than having a bunch of animals inside a room that's as big as your grandma's kitchen. So how does this work?
Our technology allows us to expand cells isolated from a small tissue biopsy taken without hurting the animals. We organize these cells into minuscule tissues and place them in a unique environment that is designed to perfectly mimic animal physiology, allowing those small tissues to organically grow into large muscles, essentially just like they do in nature. Our technology is unique as it allows for local production or distributed manufacturing. We can place our meat-growing machines in local supermarkets, in restaurants, and even at your own home.
So Supermeat claims that they're able to extract stem cells from animals and able to grow meat inside a petri dish, and they also claim that it's not going to harm animals. So it sounds like Supermeat really cares about the animals, the environment, and people's health.
Woo. Well, that's scary. Okay, the point is, well, I read that Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Elon Musk have all invested in one of these companies. It's called Memphis Meats. And they've all invested heavily, and they believe that, well, if they do something, I'm getting worried. If they put their money where their mouth is, I'm getting worried. Well, the point is, I don't know, but this is what they say, less land use. We all know that's sterile, and it can be made at home. But I think I like this idea a little better because, well, I'm fond of seafood, and I'm a fishitarian, and while I was making the slide, my wife says, yeah, I'm on a seafood diet. So I said, what do you mean by you're on a seafood diet? So whenever I see food, I eat. Terrible idea. But seafood is something that's big because, look at this one. It's called open ocean farming, where you use the oceans to farm. See, right now we've got this cage culture and stuff which is polluting our rivers and the coastlines getting polluted. This is something different. Fish are raised in an open environment where you just go out far away, right in the middle of the sea. And low density, fully submerged pens. I think you look at the film and you figure that out. No land use, no fresh water use, very low polluting. Go, Bob.
The open ocean is one of the most pristine environments on the planet. The water's clean, it's not impacted by land-based activities, so it results in a very clean fish. I'm Brian O'Hanlon, the founder of Open Blue Sea Farms. We're the largest open ocean farm in the world. Part of the idea of open ocean farming is that we can move the farms closer to major infrastructure and major markets. There's a number of reasons why we came to Panama. Transportation infrastructure is unmatched. The Panama Canal is a backbone for this economy here. So it allows us to bring in raw materials very efficiently and export finished products to the markets. We're about 7.5 to 8 miles out in the ocean. It literally almost looks like farmland where you have these large mooring grid structures which run literally 1 kilometer from end to end, and with the different pens growing fish inside. It's a unique site because there's probably no place in the world where farms are located over the horizon in a completely open environment. It's almost like a thriving little town out there. Boats moving around, different activities going on. Right now we can harvest about 20 to 25 tons in a one harvest.
Still kind of labor intensive, but we're working right now on trying to streamline and slowly automate the whole process. It looks crude. We're kind of inventing this stuff as we go.
The great thing about farming in the oceans is three-dimensional. Unlike farming crops on land, where you have two-dimensional farming, we're not only going on that two-dimensional plane, but we're going deep. So you can imagine the potential for productivity in the oceans just far exceeds what we can do on land. I think opening up the oceans to new farming frontiers, if you want to call it, for me, fish is really the first step. We had the opportunity to work with cobia, and it was pretty incredible to see the cobia just literally grow before your eyes. I mean, from morning to evening, you could see growth in the fish. We're really just at the tip of the spear with where we think we can go with cobia. We do expect to diversify geographically with cobia in the future. I view the open ocean as this huge opportunity in the future, in the coming decades, and it's not going to be a matter of years, it's going to be a matter of decades that we open up the oceans and we farm the oceans as we farm the land.
So that was open ocean farming, and that was an interesting idea. Now, what about business and what do we do? Well, this brings us to a fairly recent book that was published by Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne, on the blue ocean strategy. And this is the key really to survival for companies into the future. What they say is, and I'll very briefly tell you this, you can read the book, it's a new way of thinking, it's a strategic mindset. It's all about, right now, companies are focused on how to beat the competition, how to win in the existing market. And they call these existing industries as red industries, where you've got a lot of competition, it's overcrowded, shrinking profit margins. Whereas when you look at new areas, they call the blue ocean strategy, which are wide open, there's no competition, you're the first man. Like if I asked you a quiz question here, like who was the first man on the moon, I'm sure everyone would say, yeah, it was Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin. And if I asked you who was the second, you would say, God knows who. Because everyone knows the first. And blue ocean strategy is all about being the first in a new place and creating the market. And I think that's the way to go. Because we'd all have to keep one eye on how this market's emerging. Because sooner or later, we'll have to worry about how sustainable our businesses are when it comes to the planet. So what's your blue ocean? Well, that's something I'd leave you with to think about. But is this all mere crystal ball gazing? Actually, do you think people are going to grow meat at home and people are going to stop eating grass-fed beef? And do you think it's going to happen? I don't know, because some people even think that, global warming, I got this famous quote from a famous man. He says, the concept of global warming, you can read it, was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. So, I don't know whether you're on his side or you think global warming is really a problem. Well, I just wondered. I said I did all this crystal ball gazing, went to the future, what not. What if? What if I said, no, I shall continue eating beef and we grow and this is all hogwash, this is all rubbish and blah, 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 blah. What would happen? What actually, is it the end of the world? Are we really going to be blown out into oblivion because we're not worried about the planet and global warming and greenhouse? I just came across an interesting film because, you see, I live in a city called Mumbai in India. And I live by the coast. I live by the beach. I've stayed there for all my life. When I was a child, we don't have open spaces. So we used to go to the beach and play football and play cricket and stuff there. The beach where I used to play on, that's not there anymore. It doesn't exist. It's gone. There is no beach. And I'm not a dinosaur. Okay. It has actually gone extinct. So I moved and I've gone to another place which had a beach. The beach used to be about 1,500 meters in width at low tide. So when I wake up in the morning, I look out of the beach and I see where the tide is. It used to be about 1,500 meters. Well, it's now about 500 meters. And every year, with the monsoon winds, I get the tide nearer and nearer to my doorstep. In fact, we had 3 floods in 2 months this year. And floods means about 3 feet of water. I'm getting worried. So I wanted to figure out, hey, where will I be if I survive? So I went onto the net and I found this. Bob, all yours.
Sea levels are rising. The oceans have been pushing higher at a greater rate year after year due to melting ice. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates they could rise by another meter or more by the end of this century. Research has predicted that the Arctic may experience ice-free summers as soon as 2050. If all the Earth's land ice were to melt, our oceans would rise 216 feet. So what would this mean for Asia's coastlines? Just 3 feet of added sea level would eliminate up to 14,000 square feet of the Indian subcontinent. So a rise of 70 times that would be disastrous for the region. Mumbai and Calcutta would be underwater, along with the entire country of Bangladesh, which is home to 160 million people. The coasts of Southeast Asia and the surrounding islands would be pushed inland, drowning Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City, Singapore, Manila, and Hong Kong. Land that's currently home to 600 million Chinese will disappear underwater, wiping out Shanghai and Beijing. Sea levels in Japan will rise 10 to 20% faster than the global average. After all is said and done, hundreds of millions of people will be forced to retreat inland, leaving behind the continent's largest and most prosperous cities to be buried by the ocean.
Well, that's all I have to say, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening so patiently to me. And thank you once again for having me here, Justin.